Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerdarchy Steve. Today I'm joined by this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted, how are you doing this fine and lovely evening, sir?
Doing good. I got a full day of working, came home, worked out a little bit, and now I'm going to hang out with some fine nerds.
And talk about some dungeon crawling, huh?
We will be talking about dungeon crawling. And I guess the impetus for this video is from one of our own games. Like we have not done dungeon crawling in our own game for a very long time. Because our games tend to be much more narrative focused, a lot less combat-y. But the game that I've been running, I've really been trying to sift through different play styles of gaming of D&D, and I hadn't done a dungeon crawl yet. So we left off with you guys basically just starting a dungeon.
Indeed. So you had thrown that out there, and it was like, oh well, we're always looking for what kind of things haven't we done live chats on. So I was like, hey, let's throw that into the mix. How do you feel about doing dungeon crawls as a topic? Now we've done videos talking about dungeon crawls, and there's plenty of information that can be out there, but in this free form, it's like, well, how do we expand upon it? Well, what do we look at when it comes to dungeon crawls?
Well, I would like to know, chat. What do you guys think of dungeon crawls? Do you still use them in your games? How frequently do they come up? What is what are your thoughts? You like them? You hate them? Let us know in the chat. Ask any questions you might have. Um, oh, see, we've got Seraph saying Seraph never done a dungeon crawl. Wow, and I'm not surprised because I feel like modern gaming has really moved away from that now. Some of the many of the adventures that you can buy from Wizards of the Coast and other publishers, I feel like they may have like mini dungeons in them, but there's not a lot of them that are just like straight up dungeon crawls, like old school. Ravenloft has some, once you get into the castle of Ravenloft, I think you get a bit more of that. When Dungeon of the Mad Mage, you're going to get a bit of that going on. But I think aside from that, they tend to be more like kind of mini, in a way. Dungeon
Right.
crawls are kind of old fashioned. They are, and it is a very specific type of game. And I feel like for modern sensibilities, like it's hard to make sense of it, right? And literally in the dungeon crawl that I'm running for you guys, that is one of the things that I had to grapple with. I'm not going to get into it specifically in this stream because Ted and company are just starting it and going through it. But like, how do you make the dungeon make sense, right? Because old school dungeons really didn't have to make sense um as much. They were just like you kick in the door, you beat up some monsters, you take their stuff, and you just keep repeating that process until there's no more doors left.
And that was one of the things that I was going to touch on, is the old school style dungeon versus some of the way that dungeons are typically designed now. So first and foremost is the dungeon that's already planned. Do you look at the ecology of it? Does it have to make sense? Now, in older style adventures, you might have an ogre here, a goblin there, an elemental here, and some other kind of nonsense, down the road. And this room has no connection whatsoever to the other. There's no rhyme or reason. That just happens to be what's there. Then there are dungeons where there is an actual reason. There is something that is at the head, that everything in it serves a master, and everything is there for a purpose, for a reason. Some might be commoners that are lackeys that don't do anything beyond, cook, clean, and serve whoever the master of this dungeon is. So therefore they're gonna be pushovers. But you're gonna have trap makers, and you're gonna have spellcasters, and you're gonna have grunts that are able to do fighting and lift heavy things, and go hunt and kill and whatever. So and then you can have everything in between. So it's a matter of, when you're designing a dungeon, where on that spectrum do you want it to be? I feel that most people tend toward the latter these days, but some don't care and say, screw it, I'm going to do whatever I want. And that's just how it is.
Well, I mean, how would you define a dungeon?
So to me, a dungeon is something where, uh, you've got more than four rooms that are going to incorporate multiple combats. There is going to be treasure, and there is some figurehead or something in charge at the end of it that is going to be tougher than everything else that they've seen before. It could be a bruiser, it could be a wizard, it could be somewhere in between, but it's in charge, and everybody else in that dungeon knows who's in charge.
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing is it's kind of a confined space that you have to travel through. Not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be linear, but in the sense, it is sectioned off, and I feel like it like older editions. A lot of times, it would just be ruins, right? And then different monsters have decided to take up and inhabit these different parts of the ruins. And that's the part that always made it kind of weird, right? You're like, yeah, I could see this creature taking up residence, but all of them so close together, and they all have to hunt and eat, and figuring out the ecology of it. Matter of fact, one of the favorite things about Dragon Magazine back in the day for me was the dungeon ecologies. Talk about the monsters, how they would get along, and and because and that's where it kind of like started moving away from the randomness of like we're just gonna throw a bunch of stuff here where you just keep going into the dungeon and getting deeper, right? Traditionally, the further down you went in a dungeon, the more dangerous. And
Yep.
again, it just didn't have to make a whole lot of sense.
And when I look at that kind of mindset, I'm not one, as a player, that is ever going to criticize the GM for, hey, what's the ecology here, why are all these things together? There could be something that eyes, either the player or the character, are just not seeing. But even if there is no rhyme or reason for why it's there, the DM put whatever they wanted in the dungeon, and I'm okay with it. I'm here to, as the player, to overcome whatever challenges the DM puts forth, or to run screaming if we can't, or die a glorious death. Whatever works.
Now, sometimes you can kind of make it sense by theming the dungeon. You have a dungeon full of all undead. For whatever reason, when things die in this dungeon, they come back as some kind of undead or another. And generally, the undead leave each other alone. They just hate the living, and maybe there's a reason why they can't leave this place. Maybe they're eternally trapped here to guard. Like a mummy's tomb is a really good would be a really good example of a great dungeon. Having a
Mhm.
a pyramid where basically you're trying to get to the pharaoh's tomb. Maybe the pharaoh is the mummy, and it's full of traps and different critters and creatures. Um, I think constructs work really well because you know they're they're kind of programmed to do a specific thing. They don't require sustenance like undead, and and they're just gonna do what they were ordered to do until they don't exist anymore.
All right. So while this isn't, about dungeon crawls, we always like to answer questions in the chat. And I'll throw out to Sean, who put question in front of it, as we always ask. He wants to know, why are displacer beasts so hard to kill?
Now, I'm wondering if this is in this opening of a joke or if he really wants to know, because I've found that my games are really not that hard to kill unless you put them up against really low level players.
The fact that displacer beasts have disadvantage to attack them uh but their armor class isn't exactly high.
Mhm.
So like once you start getting to fifth level and you get those extra attacks and you've gotten that extra +1 to hit if you increased your your prime stat, I feel like Displacer Beast, quickly fall off the realm of challenging, which is why I always like to be like, all right, can I soup these up any, and create something a little bit more fantastic. Um, not that Displacer Beasts aren't already great, but they're not a challenge for higher level parties, and at least not in our games. So I don't really see it as hard to kill.
Hard to keep a lot more like it. So I want to also dig into the chat here, some commentary on dungeons. We've got Surf saying, Surf, old school D&D was also more deadly. Dungeon crawls required you be creative with RP because you weren't trying to get into combat. And also, in general, old school D&D was a lot more about testing the players than it was about testing the character, right? You know,
Yes.
from third edition on, it really became more about the characters and their skill, power sets, and what they could do. But in earlier editions, it was a lot more stripped down, and you had less options. So it was like, what could you do with what you had? And it really did kind of force players to be a lot more creative. Not that players aren't creative now or can't be creative now, but it's easier to be a little bit lazier about it because you have so many cool options right on your character sheet that you can use. Instead, like in second and first edition, you're like, I don't know, I might need to use this 10-foot pole for something instead, right? Like,
And
it, you're looking at your gear, going, how can I use this? Or like one of my favorite pieces of art, from earlier editions, and I believe they actually redid a version of it in Dungeon Master's Guide. Is where the adventurers are in a dungeon and are laying out a string line behind them to find their way back, and the troll is following them and spooling up the thread line behind them so that they can't find their way back easily.
yeah, and that was a direction that I was going to go, is to kind of look at the elements from earlier editions that creative players tended to use. Oh, I'm going to use a 10-foot pole to try and tap every little stone to see if I can figure out what's trapped. And you know DMs got wind of this happening. I was like, oh well, sometimes the trap was going to trigger and them be completely out of the danger zone. But some DMs get clever and be like, well, it's known that people use these things. So now, those that do use the 10-foot pole are going to be in the area of attack because that's where, the trap goes off. So it gets to be dangerous, from that angle. I
Well,
know that there's,
that
go ahead.
also kind of like dovetails into something else that Sarah Sand was saying, and like the fact that in earlier editions, DMs were more adversarial. The dungeon was the crucible that they would test the players, their characters through. But I was also thinking too, like I think like key elements of traditional dungeons have a lot of puzzles, have a lot of traps, have a lot of tricks. It's not just
Sure.
the monsters,
Right.
behind the door, but also all these devious things. And in earlier editions, like Tomb of Horrors is a great example of where stuff was put in there that makes the characters really curious, and they'd have to work really hard to try and figure it out. But really, like, it's just that's like part of the trap, right? That was the lore, was putting
Mm,
some. So they have to work really hard to basically put their head into a sphere of annihilation. Uh, like in Tomb of Horrors. So
right. Which I've said this on camera and off. I think that the sphere of annihilation, that is like, oh, somewhere randomly in a dungeon there's a black entrance. When you go to put your hand or your head in it, you're just dead. I I find that that's absolutely absurd. It's never anything I would do to any of my any player at my table, because I don't find any joy in, oh, look, I'm just going to be, some a-hole adversarial DM who's going to kill you just because you're trying to find an answer to the puzzle or want to find more loot. Like, nah, that's not my style. And
Liches, man, liches be crazy.
but related to the 10-foot pole, there's the, a spool of thread, or the bag of ball bearings, or any number of items that you can you know stockpile to be like, all right, well, how can I be creative here? How can I try to draw the monsters out or send the monsters off in another direction? There's lots of fun things that can be done. And to this day, I think some players like playing that style that way, because once you get down to it, like, usually the good treasure is going to be all the way at the bottom of the dungeon. So if you can bypass encounters and avoid using resources, such as spell slots, potions, or what have you, that makes it a lot more likely that you're going to be successful.
Well, Tally brings up, talking about using more, having to use more tactics in dungeon crawls, and specifically picking your battles. Many parties quickly stop just running and rushing into any given room, instead trying to stealth, social, and finally location to ambush instead of straight combat. Because the idea is, if you're in the dungeon, sometimes it's not easy to just leave the dungeon. Or like in those early days, my DMs would always, if you left the dungeon, they would repopulate those rooms that you cleared out a lot of times. So
Mhm.
it was kind of like starting over.
Yeah, and that's always a tough one. When that kind of stuff happens. Thankfully, that hasn't been my experience. It's been, my days of dungeon crawls across numerous GMs have been a little bit more forgiving. I will say, to me, my most memorable dungeon crawl was my first season with the Dawnbringers, because we wound up, we were playing, God, I'm totally drawing a blank on it. But we basically were getting through like a single room per session. And sometimes, like, it wasn't because, like, oh, it was just all straight combat. There was always something going on that in our 3-ish hour game session, we would open one door, deal with whatever's there, and 3 hours later, that's it. We were done. So that was kind of
Yeah.
crazy that it took us like literal months of real world time to get through a single 24-hour day. It was insane.
So Seraph Sands wants to know, what is everyone's favorite starting equipment for using in dungeons? I love pittons.
Keep those doors open, or keep them doors closed.
Keep them open, keep them closed, climbing, whatever. There's always something you can use them for.
I got to
You
go
can make a
with
trap.
Tally's first one, rope. I think rope is useful for binding up prisoners, or what have you. It's useful for being able to climb down or climb up. Yeah, you need the grappling hook attached to the end of the rope to go up, but I think rope has been far more useful to me than pittons have.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, basically whatever comes in the starting gear is usually pretty good. Um, you know, I'm curious to see what you guys do with your equipment on your upcoming dungeon crawl.
Well, I don't think Vel's got a whole lot of dungeon equipment on him. We'll have to see. I'm guessing our Our Sticks is probably going to be the most useful here because he's the rogue, so he's probably got some good stuff on him. But we're going to have to get a little bit creative. I think followed by Sticks is going to be Clutch, being an artificer. He might have some interesting gadgets in the gear he's got.
So, what are some interesting ideas for dungeon locations?
So the great part about a dungeon is they can literally be, anything, anywhere. We did a video a while back that was talking about like basically like the bag of doors, and that is literally nothing but a magic item set to do dungeon crawls. You open up the bag, you pull out a door, you go to wherever it is, and yeah, you can go to you know whatever's there, but it could literally just be, oh look, this is tonight's dungeon. You go in, you deal with whatever's there, and when you leave, that's it. The door's gone, and the bag has one less door that's in it. And it's a great campaign idea for the DM who just wants to prep dungeon crawls or not give the players any kind of inkling as to what is going on.
I think
So
when
that was
you,
like,
I think when you and Doug came up with that, you got one of you guys have just been playing too much.
yeah, Munchkin is certainly a good game that you know could have that. But I mean that was a while ago. Um, I've got handful of ideas of things that could be done with dungeons, or places where dungeons could be. What do you got?
So, we actually trying to think. All right. Yeah, we actually just put out a video last week talking about heist campaign. And it kind of gives 10 different ideas for where you could have a heist. And some of those are great. Like one of them is a vault in the elemental plane of water. One of them is an art gallery where all the objects and everything is magical. A library of forbidden knowledge. So any of these things can be a dungeon, right? Especially I like the idea of a library of forbidden knowledge, and also we have a product that's kind of based on that as well. The idea that there's this place that collects all kinds of forbidden knowledge, right? And you know, I like the idea of the place is kind of infested with that forbidden knowledge, like it's like been seeping out of the books and the scrolls into everything else. Maybe it's corrupted the caretaker or the librarian that is supposed to keep wraps on everything, but it's just like too much forbidden knowledge in one area. So it takes what would have been basically just storage and could turn it into a labyrinth of bookshelves and vaults and scrying rooms, um where everything has kind of been infected by you know this forbidden knowledge, right? So like you could kind of, whether you want it to be driven by undead aberrations. I think you could definitely theme where this forbidden knowledge is going, how it's interacting and affecting the environment. And maybe it hits a point where it's like critical mass, and it's going to kind of keep spreading if the adventurers don't go in there and shut it down. But like now the whole complex is infested, and maybe now it's kind of like spreading out beyond that. So in that sense, like it's a dungeon, you have to get to the heart of the dungeon, see what's going on, and see if you can't stop this problem.
Those things are always fantastic, and once you start delving into forbidden knowledge, that's where you can be like, all right, well, this could be kind of crazy, and I can link to some more evilish monsters or things that are like from beyond this place. some of the real, darker, crazy aberrations. But it opens up into a lot of different territories where magic is concerned. Any character that has like or any player who has a character goal that is, I'm looking for this, insert information here. These kind of places are great for, all right, well, sure, you have to go and figure this out and survive it, but you know, if you're tempted, you can look around and try to actually acquire the information and solve that player goal. So that can be a lot of fun in that regards.
Yeah, third edition had like some cool rules for fiends possessing uh people and objects.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, populating a dungeon or something that wasn't initially dungeon per se, but this infestation from the lower planes, but instead of physically manifesting, most of it is, the spirits of those fiends inhabiting things of the mortal world. So it's kind of flavored that way, but it might be more like animated objects, or townsfolk that have been kind of corrupted. And it could also add another layer too of like, well, can they can they save the people that have been corrupted, right? Can they cure them, uh, or not, right? So, and also the moral dilemma of, well, if you think you might be able to cure them, then you're not going to want to just slaughter everyone. So they have to figure out how to stop them, without just turning it into a massacre. Especially if you use a location that the players have been to before and actually like know the people. Like you could literally
That's
take like a town and almost turn the town itself into the dungeon.
Yeah, that's one of those, really, really harsh things, is the, like, all right, those NPCs that you really cared about and really you know really are invested in, well, they're now corrupted, they're now different, they're changed. And you know usually there's always going to be a handful of fatalities before the players really figure it out. It's like, but wait, we were friends, and next thing you know, you're killing them, and wait, everybody's this way now. What's going on? And then they think back to what they've done. It's like, no.
Well, yeah, someone someone had said, like, they'd left this comment. It was very kind of like along those lines of kind of like being adversarial towards the players, and
Mm-hmm.
talking about like beating the players, where as if D&D is a game where you win against them, right? Like it used to be a very old mindset, and like my response is like, one, why would you want to do that? But two, like I find the best foil against my players
Mm-hmm.
isn't monsters but moral dilemmas, where they have to having to ask themselves, well, are we the monsters? So I feel like that stuff has the greatest impact.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I've been on the receiving end of, that kind of mindset of like, oh crap, what are we doing here? So like, it's tough when you're you know in a world where good is not always black and white, and evil is not always black and white. It's all right, well, we did this. Oh, that wasn't really the best thing to do. Now how do we handle it? And you can keep having this spiral of bad decisions. And we kind of talked about that, and had that happen in one of your games in not too distant past. So it's this was pretty crazy, and it really made my character have to think a little bit harder about what it is that we're doing. And you know I think that's an aspect of what gaming is supposed to be, is to kind of have these moments where characters have the ability to grow.
And you can do that kind of stuff in a dungeon as well, right? Like one of the early 5e adventures I had ran, and I've run it a bunch of times at this point, was the Maze of Mandoon. And like you guys had encounters in there where they weren't they weren't all combat encounters, and some of them were other people that had kind of failed to make it out of the maze, and you got to interact with them and feel their sorrow. And then like even like I remember, I'm pretty sure like some of the players are like, oh, we're gonna figure out how to get you out of there. They never did, but they intended to. And also I think it was one of the people that got trapped got turned into a tree, not a Trent, but they were just like trapped in a tree and just kind of been there for they don't know how long. And I think one of the gobelos took a cutting from the tree uh to take back with them. I'm kind of sad that I never did
Well, I mean, that's it's one of those things that happens on occasion. There's always going to be those things that the our style of GMing where we put out all of these potential hooks. You know, not all of them are going to get solved. Not all of them are going to get even bitten upon. But that's just the style of, well, see what the players do, and sometimes it's pure chaos.
that. Seraph Sands, both are difficult to balance, adversarial with monsters, and gray moral ambiguity needs to stay light and not cross the line of player comfort. Yeah, like even when I introduce that stuff into a game, I I rarely do it as an absolute. I often offer it up as a choice or even a reflection of what the players have been doing and showing them just another viewpoint of it to make them think. Uh Ted was talking about an instance where um they had decided to hunt wolverines because they wanted wolverine poison and wolverine cows. And and they accomplished what they wanted to, and then they later went back to that same forest and encountered one of the surviving wolverines, but it was now you know connected with the druid that lived in the forest. And to the druid, the party were the villains, that basically hunted for sport and trophy as far as is concerned. And so a fight ensues, and they take out the druid and the druid's minions, and then they track the druid back to his house. And what they find there is the druid's infant child, and wife, and a couple guardians, and they fight their ways through the guardians, get to the cabin. There's a ton of loot there, but also there's this woman going, take whatever you want, just please don't kill my child. And so it's at that point that the players have to figure out what they want to do. So like that's the kind of stuff that I like to throw out there based on things that they've done, in the game. And that was a pivotal point for the group, which you can talk about, Ted, since you're kind of like the impetus.
Yeah, so pretty much as soon as like she says, don't kill my child, the literal table was drawn. Yeah, one was kind of whatever. The two sitting, on the side, where I was, were like, yeah, I'm done here. There was a goblin barbarian and the Simic hybrid sorcerer myself. We're like, yeah, I don't think this is the right thing to do. The other side of the table, their characters were like, dude, there's stuff here. We should just end this and take the stuff.
They're like, this baby's not going to put up a fight at all.
So like, well, like most of the time, like I understand, like I'm playing D&D, I'm making heroes. And we're playing a post-apocalyptic world, so like I'm like, all right, I'm maybe not as good but I'm definitely going to draw the line at, oh yeah, killing an unarmed woman and her baby, or just taking all of the stuff. It's like there's even in the real world, or sorry, even in a fake world, there's going to be karma. So no, I can't be having this. And it was a crazy thing, and you know, yeah, it's you know, I don't know. There was
Well,
definitely lines that I wasn't willing to cross there.
it's kind of funny now because now like the characters that have lower intelligence and less morals are like questioning like the rest of the group of like, all right, are these okay to kill, or is this a problem? Like, so like you like the seed has been kind of planted, and it may not be so much like those characters actually care about that outcome, but they care about the other characters in the party and want to stay in their good graces. So they care about that, right?
They
So
they
they
care
so
more. They care about the opinions of themselves from their party members.
listen. I'm gonna take that as growth.
Sure.
Uh,
uh so what about any other places that could be kind of interesting to do dungeon crawls? So the first thing that comes to my mind, that I am not certain I've ever done, but would be really cool, uh, is I think, a dungeon crawl inside a massive creature. I think that could be a badass thing.
trying to think. I feel like I've done this to a certain extent. I did. You guys, because I love ripping off things like Star Wars. So in one of the Spelljammer games, you guys did end up inside of a monster.
Is that where was that where we fought the demon that, got banished?
It was sadly yes,
See, I think that was the part that, my memory went to.
because
And
he was like
it's
at the
not
center of a lake of stomach acid.
it wasn't so much a ripping off as you're taking inspiration from greatness. I love doing that myself. I am always, whenever I'm watching something, listening to something, living life, it's like, well, you know, how is this going to affect, gaming? What does this make me do? I mean, literally the other night I was, surfing YouTube clips with my wife, and she loves those tattoo shows. And there was I marveled at this was the tattoo challenge was they had to create the fantasy, oh, let's hybrid monsters or animals together. And I'm like, all right, every single one of these things needs to be a stat block.
Yeah.
This is just fantastic. One of the ones that like stood out was like the shark spider.
Uh,
I'm like, yep, I am totally going to make that. And it's going to be absolutely freaking terrifying. Uh, but so yeah, say steal from everywhere, get inspired from everywhere, because that's always just a glory thing. And then the nerds at your table, when they recognize, hey, is this from such and such? They're happy that they caught the reference, and you're happy that they see where you got your inspiration from.
so old school AD&D, I changed first encounter of trolls where players could pass free for a kiss from the female troll leader. Player failed con check and battle ensued. But every dungeon crawl doesn't always mean hack and slash. Very true, but also, what kind of kiss do you have to make a con save for?
I mean, maybe the character totally digs on trolls, and you gotta, not be infatuated. Or maybe, this troll is just that hideous that it's like, all right, you got to make a con save to not, you know get nauseous in so doing. Or maybe, the skin is poisoned. Maybe, there's lots of different things that could come about
I
to
think
make
that's
a con
definitely how you
save.
catch filth fever. Kissing trolls.
Isn't that from Audiugs though?
Adiugs, rats. It's fairly common in D&D. So, Mr. Rob's cleaning service. I did a city as a dungeon crawl. I have a concept for a campaign that basically is that. It showed up a little bit. So in our one campaign, um, the players had uncovered uh, or they were there when a prison ship was unearthed by like an earthquake or something. Not some natural phenomena, but a giant kaiju style monster was being kept in there, and it gets free and basically just leaves a wake of destruction everywhere it goes. Um, and ends up in a major city and going through there, and ends up when it dies there, but like everything near it kind of gets corrupted, and it kind of just like sprouts monsters off of it. So like you guys, in order to kind of defeat the monster, had to go into the prison ship, which became like a mini dungeon in and of itself, and find the creature's heart that was actually still in the ship, and destroy the heart. And that's how you guys kind of killed the kaiju. Um, and obviously, I'm not the first one to use a spaceship as a dungeon. Uh,
No,
you know, barrier. What is it? Something barrier peaks.
Expedition to Barrier Peaks.
Yeah, was like one of the early adventures, which was just that introduced a lot of like sci-fi elements into the game, but also like that kind of stuff is kind of cool for a dungeon because it can be automated, right? Like you can go with the science aspect of it, or you can go with more of a magicy aspect of it and have everything run by AI, not artificial intelligence, but arcane intelligence. Um, that creates the challenge for the players, almost like the X-Men Danger Room or something, but set to 11, uh, and using constructs and whatever else it can summon through magic would also be a good way to kind of theme an adventure as well. Which we've also done. Pretty sure we've done videos on that as well. The idea of the arcane intelligence. It was connected to something else. That might have been like when we made like our very first like Mage Forge video.
Hmm.
Um, not where we made something, but we actually did the video about the a Mage Forge itself. I just remember us making like an arcane vault or something of
That
that nature.
sounds familiar. I mean,
Well, four
we've
thousand
we've made
videos.
we made thousands of videos, so it's definitely a thing. So since we're talking about dungeon crawls and that, uh, it's not the first notice because I did mention it Friday during our gameplay of Old Guard. We are nearing the end of our Zoo Mafia game run by Bobby Partridge. So we have already determined that the next in the hot seat is going to be yours truly. And after a very long hiatus, we're going to be coming back with season 2 of Dungeons and Delving. And while the game is not necessarily dungeon crawls, there are some aspects of what I did in that show that kind of showcase elements of dungeon crawling. And I took it to a crazy level. I thought I had something amazing and interesting when I came up with the idea, and apparently it was already done with X Crawl for third edition. Uh, but it ended with a very cool cliffhanger, and some of the players have been kind of chomping at the bit to find out what actually happened to those characters. So we'll get to see that before too long. And at this point in time, we're only like a few weeks out because we got 2 episodes left of Blood Moonshine, and then we usually take a week off, and then we'll be diving straight into season 2.
And then we'll see if I can finally become a famous chef. That game is definitely a lot of fun. It also kind of fits in tonight's theme as well because the idea is it's a reality TV show where you do dungeon crawls as almost as a sport, as an extreme sport, basically.
Yes.
And there's a point system, and different teams get voted off the show. So and there's a lot of different challenges. You got the traps, the puzzles, the monsters. So it's kind of like a very like slimmed down dungeon crawl, but like each episode was all about going into the quote unquote dungeon.
Well, so the style I had run was the even numbered episodes would be the event. There it was the dungeon, and it was usually broken down into three different aspects of combat and challenges and what have you, and then the odd numbered episodes would be the characters interacting with the other competitors and seeing what the points we're looking like, but also preparing for whatever the next dungeon might be. So it was a lot of fun to kind of get into a reality show aspect of D&D. Um, and I'm very enthused, from the moment that the players decided that they wanted me to run this game. I've been hard at work and trying to get this properly planned out, because they have no idea what's going on with their characters. So like usually with our games, like we have a session zero in between seasons where like we discuss a lot of things, but like if I start talking about where they are and what's going on, it was totally going to ruin the surprise. So I'm like, nope, we're going to dive straight in and we're going to figure it all out.
And it's kind of a continuation anyway. So
Yeah.
we'll see what season two, if there's even more dungeons to be delved, or if there's
Uh,
any
there,
dungeons
there's
at all.
there's some possibilities. There's some stuff to be looked at. So I'm looking to have some fun with you guys and see how you react to certain things and see what NPCs might be coming back and what NPCs might be left to the wayside.
So are there any dungeons that you want to?
That I want to run. I mean, it's really tough. Um, Lately, and I've tossed this out a couple of times to different groups and whatnot. But I really want to run a dungeon inside a volcano, like a long-term dungeon, not like
Uh,
oh, here's what we do tonight, or what have you. I think there could be a lot of fun dealing with um, the heat element and the literal specter of death of lava, because it does a ridiculous amount of damage. Items can be lost, limbs can be lost, lives can be lost. But with a character that is a little bit um, you know, smart or savvy when it comes to tactical movement, you could be like, all right, well, some combats are going to get made a lot easier when you just push or throw or shove, the bad guys into the lava. And, well, 20 die 6 later.
yeah. So, like I had mentioned this up a little bit earlier, but so one of the campaign ideas I had. So generally, when we um, set up a new campaign for our home group, bless you. Generally, the GM will be like, "Here's like 5 ideas. Which one do you guys want to do?" And like one of the ones that I've pitched a couple times uh, is Raiders of Rylor, and so Rylor is this town where the or city where this kaiju monster kind of went down, but completely like like everywhere it went, it just left in its wake this oozy, waxy substance that would just cover everything, kind of like the Zerg and Creep, uh, or there also what was it? What is that series? Lara,
Codex Alera.
Codex Alara. They had like kind of monsters that were similar that you would use make it similar kind of stuff as well. So both of them I kind of took inspiration from. Wherever this thing went, it kind of like spread this stuff and also corrupted everything. Well, the city, they couldn't stop it. They couldn't keep this thing out. So they ended up abandoning it. So the city is full of people's possessions. Yeah, so essentially all kinds of treasure and stuff, whatever people couldn't carry on them, they just left behind. So the premise is that a kind of like a permanent camp gets set up outside the city, and from it, venturing companies, for make forays into the city to try and scavenge, salvage whatever they can, and also try and clear out the monsters. So the premise for it is, you know, you're you're constantly like going in, delving the city, coming back. You might have rivalries between with other adventuring groups, but then also sometimes at night things come out of the city and might attack the camp, and you might have to deal with that as well. So I thought it would be a fun idea, and also because we haven't really done um, a kind of dungeon delving campaign,
Mhm.
I thought that would be a good way to do.
And I think it's a fantastic idea. I mean, it was definitely in the top tier for me. I'm very interested in seeing, like, I know you know uh that was a fun idea to take this very you know seedy rundown town or city and have it overwritten or overrun by these interesting monsters. I think it would be a nice chance to create a series of um new types of monsters that would be brought on from this creature that died. So, like, it's like, oh, no, you can't make a check because you have no idea what this is. You've never
Yeah.
seen it before because there's not been an option to have seen it before. And those kind of things are, to me as a player, very exciting to be like, oh, well, we're the first that got to kill and talk about these things. So, like, depending upon what type of character you make, like, you could be like, all right, well, I'm gonna be the one to write all this stuff down, so you could be like, oh well, I'm proficient in calligraphy supplies because I want to go in and write it all up and draw these things, or whatnot. So you're every short rest, you're pulling out your journal and you're making these notations. And even in a game that's designed to be very combat heavy, you could really feel the flavor of what your character is in these down moments.
Yeah, well, and also too, like that's why I thought incorporating the element of other adventuring companies but
Mhm.
might be fun because you can have frenemies and tension, or maybe you have to work together to get past certain things. But it would, it'd give an opportunity for role playing and social interactions, both inside and outside of the actual dungeon setting.
Right.
And not to mention, there's always opportunities to sneak in some RP and some social encounters, even in
Oh,
the deepest and darkest of dungeons.
completely. And the more interactions you build with these NPCs, the more ways the DM has the ability to use them. Oh well, are they going to use that against you? And at some point in time, they turn the knife, or is it a scenario where it's like, oh crap, they didn't come back today. We got to go in and find them. And now we're playing rescue party. So, like, there's lots of ways to to use that. And never did I think that if Dave decided to run oh, the dungeon crawl, that there wouldn't be role playing, because that's not Dave's style.
So yeah, so I think that campaign actually came in second behind what we're playing now.
Yep.
But you guys, at the end of the day, you guys were like, no, we want motorcycles.
Because at the end of the day, like, well,
Mhm.
I've done some kind of dungeon crawls before. I think I like motorcycles because I've never done D&D and motorcycles.
Yeah, yeah, or post apocalypse. Well, I guess we've done kind of
I
Dark Sun.
we've done Dark Sun, but I also did a game in college that was referred to as Iron Hulk. That was, in a way, very very dark and kind of loosely inspired by a Dark Sun kind of thing, where um the science doesn't pan out, so don't criticize me or the GM. But basically, at midnight, if you weren't in, uh, some kind of sealed off from the elements, you would freeze to death. Um, you know, I don't know how adventurers on the road could perfectly cut out all aspects to the outside world. Um, you know, it wasn't exactly feasible, but whatever. It was his world, and there were set ways and checks that had to be made. But I was like, yeah, because at midnight it's absolute zero, which means you freeze to death. No save. That's like, all right, this is ours. But it was
Okay.
fun.
Well, that's the whole thing about, customizing the game however you want and having
Right.
crazy things like that. Although I feel like in this day and age, instant death is something we've gone way away from. But also, you said college, so that's like 20 years ago. It was still
More,
very much in the vernacular back then. So,
yeah, I mean we're talking, over 23 years ago at this point in time for me. So yeah.
well, we're coming towards the end here, so I guess we should mention that this stream and all of our live chats are sponsored by Easy Roller Dice. If you want to pick up a sweet discount, there is a link in the description down below, where you can go get the promo code for that. Also, we ran a Kickstarter; it did not succeed for the game that Ted mentioned, Mafia. We're going to run it again. You can find a link to sign up for that as well to get notified when we do. If the idea of being a zoo animal that likes to commit crimes and is trying to get made into the mafia appeals to you, that might just be your cup of tea. Um, that's stuff we probably should have mentioned a while ago, but final thoughts, Ted?
So dungeon crawls are awesome. There are, lots of ways to use them, but just because you're kicking indoors and killing monsters doesn't necessarily mean that, you should leave out the other two pillars. Exploration and social can easily be incorporated, and Dave already brought up a handful. Um, of ways and reasons. So you should definitely make sure that when you're running those dungeon crawls, you give the ability to find some lore and find some people to talk to, just to break it up and have fun and cover all aspects of or all pillars of the game.
Yeah, I would hazard to say that exploration is probably the key component of any good dungeon crawl. Aside from killing monsters in combat, but more so it's going to be about exploring this location, figuring out what happened there, what's going on, um, you know, what was there before. Like that's can be the fun too. Like a lot of times dungeons are ruins. And it's like, well, what happened to the people that were here before? Who built this? You know, where did they go? Why is it full of monsters now? Have they become the monsters somehow? Like, there's definitely a lot of fun you can have with it. I know when we ran the one game, you guys encountered a ancient dragonborn city,
Yep.
and there's a couple dragonborn in the party, and also a bunch of a couple kobolds that like to get under the dragonborn skin, and like there was definitely some association between dragonborn and kobolds made in different like sculptures and etchings and writings that were found throughout. And the goblins loved you know insinuating that the dragonborn were somehow related to the kobolds, which really seemed to unsettle the dragonborn a bit. So it could also be a way to so that makes dungeon crawls a great way to uh, add lore from your world into the game in an interactive way where you're not just like lore dumping on your players. They're like discovering it, they're unearthing it. They're finding these details out. Some of the things maybe they need to learn about in order to overcome obstacles or puzzles. So they become more vested in it. So there could be a lot of opportunities in dungeon crawls outside of just you know, combat and ways for your players to put more gold in their.
Indeed.
So with that, I want to thank everyone for hanging out with us tonight. And until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.